Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? Today we will pretend that it is Monday, April 11th, 2022, and therefore time for another show. I mean, it is time for another show, but we're pretending that it's Monday. It isn't, not now, but, well, for you it is, and you know how this goes. You may also know this drill, extremely busy as I am, and with 3 days to account for, we are rolling out that special kind of Kagro in the Morning program, which lasts for half the amount of time, but is twice as special because of the rarity with which we roll out these special 1 hour shows, just to keep you company with something while I'm running around, trying to plan my future or help my kids plan their future anyway. And wanted to record something for you so that you wouldn't be left all alone, but cramming in an additional 6 hours of recording seemed like a tall order. But could we do 3 1 hour shows? I don't know. Could we do 2 1 hour shows? Well, at this point, I'm able to tell you yes to the 2 1 hour shows or 1 2 hour show. But I'm going to split it up, you see. And we'll split it into 2 different days. And I had this whole plan. I recorded one first and said that will be the Monday show, which is now, except what follows isn't what I recorded for the Monday show. This is what I started recording for the Tuesday show. And then I said, this Tuesday show has stuff on it that I think people are on Monday are going to expect to hear discussed, even though they know that I'm doing it. So I'm switching the order. So that's very exciting. That's one of the little bits of flexibility that the podcast model lends to us. In fact, I have this little edit to add. This was the only way I could think of to correct what ended up being the error of beginning today's show by saying it was Monday, because it isn't. It wasn't when I recorded it, and it isn't now. But I figured I could perhaps save things if I just made this little correction. You'll see what I'm getting at. Hold on, bear with me. Everything that precedes this announcement, this little bit here, that says that today's show is for Monday, is a total lie. I live on a throne of lies. However, all the parts prior that said that I was originally going to use the material for today's show for Tuesday now turn out to be true, except for the part where I said I was going to use them for Monday, because Monday we did the 1 hour show, but we did it live because Greg was up and raring to go, and we figured what the hell. But today it's just not possible. Plus I didn't want to waste all the material I had. So now the Tuesday material that I said I was going to use on Monday is back to Tuesday. All is right with the world, and the lies are over, and I'll never do it again. At any rate, yes, I apologize. It will be a little shorter than usual by like 50%, which is a lot shorter than usual. But rest assured that and make it up to you somehow. I don't know. We'll be back on the air on Thursday live. We can't go any longer, but we can do it with greater enthusiasm and heart, right?
Enthusiasm.
Yeah, that's the one. I don't have any heart thing. Okay, the point is we're here. You're here. We're here. It's our time. There's less of it, but it's ours nonetheless. Okay, let me just jump straight into it. I guess what we're going to use for today's show is there's a theme, and the theme is everybody who served in the Trump administration, and most particularly in the Trump White House, was a bunch of thieving bastards and are jerks to this day. And also, some of the people who were associated with President Trump who didn't serve in the administration or in the government anywhere, but who tried to anyway, by virtue of the fact that they live in Mr. Trump's home or are members of his family, they are also jerks and bastards and deserve to go to prison as well. So I'm kind of merging it. It's kind of hammering a square peg into a round hole. Is that what they hammer? Round pegs, square holes? I don't know. Pegs that are the wrong shape for the hole that we're talking about. They're the ones that get hammered. It's kind of what we're doing here. But everyone knows that these people are jerks and we hate them. And, well, we thought we'd make a theme out of it. That's the best we can do for you. All right, so let's roll it out and give you the best hour we can and then run away very quickly and come back tomorrow with a different hour instead. All right. There's no way to do this anymore because now I forget how the beginning of the first clip goes. So we just say, roll the first clip, as though we had an assistant to roll the first clip. And it wasn't just me doing it. This is too much information. All right. Well, we all know that the fact that I'm off the air with live shows for the beginning of this week, we all know you're waiting for me, I assume, to read about the Donald Trump Jr. story. So I'm going to do it. Here it goes. I can't wait till I get back. It's just, I don't know what I'm going to say. It's hot news. It's something we got to do something about. Something's got to happen. But, nothing will happen. But okay, so what? Here's the story. You know what it is. It's the same story as always in terms of people doing something about it. But okay, try not to get bogged down in that. Maybe someday, somehow, something will happen. CNN exclusive, at least at the time that we picked up the story, we control them all. Donald Trump Jr. texted Mark Meadows, an idea for overturning the 2020 election before it was called. That is interesting. Ryan Nobles, Zachary Cohen, and Annie Grayer reporting this for CNN. This is an odd one, and I can't decide actually whether that means it's better or worse that he's texting this apparently on November 5th. The election has been held, but hasn't been called at that point. I think it was November 7th they finally make the announcement. All right, Joe Biden won, and I go to the Trump golf course, and everybody has a party outside, and gives him the finger as he drives away in his limo. So, okay. You know the story probably, but you haven't heard me grouse about it while I read it yet, and that's what you're here for, I think. 2 days after the 2020 presidential election, as votes were still being tallied, Donald Trump's eldest son texted the then White House Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, and you have to say that because there were like 19 chiefs of staff while he was there. This time it was Mark Meadows, the illegal voter from North Carolina. He texts to him that we have operational control to ensure his father would get a second term with Republican majorities in the U.S. Senate and swing state legislatures, CNN has learned. This was very interesting, of course. It was a variant of what later comes out in the Eastman memo. It's pretty much the same thing. Just force your way back into office. Just tell people they're going to go back and change the Electoral College outcome by fiat. But it was interesting that Donald Trump Jr. had any inkling that this was even an idea. I was going to say that it was even a possibility, but it really isn't supposed to be a possibility either. But I was fairly surprised to find out that this had reached him, and he says that he grasped it, I guess. Although now the story now is supposedly it was just, I think, his lawyer, Futterfuss, right? Alan Futterfuss is I think in the story it'll tell you too. At some point he says, maybe it was just a supporter texted that to Junior, and Junior was excited about the prospect and passed it on. Check this thing out, see if it's worth doing, is the excuse it's supposed to be. Although somebody on Twitter was pointing out, I love to spend my time that way. I'm always forwarding texts, which are not really all that easily forwardable. I mean, you can cut and paste the text of one into another text out to someone else, but they're not easily forwardable like email is. But okay, whatever. Anyway, this was that, and also I did see somebody else laughing and saying, if it wasn't for the fact that this fell into the hands of the kind of person who has to say operational control, we have operational control rather than just control, tells you an awful lot too. And I don't remember who it was, and it might even have been Scott for all I know, now that I think back on it. I didn't put that aside, but it was a good comment. I don't know. Could have been Travis, and could have been Scott, and could have been one of the other people that also has a cat for an icon that we talked to on Twitter. But could have been none of them either, right? But if it happens to have been one of you, pat yourself on the back. So anyway, in the text, which at the time when I picked up this story had not previously been reported, but now everyone's talking about it, Donald Trump Jr. lays out ideas for keeping his father in power by subverting the Electoral College process, according to the message reviewed by CNN. And when you review it, you'll think the same thing. The text is among records obtained by the House Select Committee investigating January 6th, 2021, which is very interesting because this was, of course, a text sent on November 5th, 2020, and that the January 6th committee is so interested in it tells us a lot about how they've broadened their scope, although it makes a lot of sense. You could see a, shying away from it, but it makes obvious sense. The plan that he's discussing on November 5th is the one that the mob is at the Capitol in support of on January 6th. So there's really no separating the two, and I'm glad they're on that track. It's very simple. Trump Jr. texted to Meadows on November 5th, adding later in the same missive, "We have multiple paths. We control them all." And I must say, I was struck by the bravado and all this, right? We have operational control. We have multiple paths. We control them all. And then he takes the plan and runs out to execute it and proceeds to lose 60 plus cases in a row in court and then lead an insurrection that gets 700 plus of his top supporters arrested. What a demonstration of operational control and multiple paths. Every single one of the paths got shut down and laughed out of court and kicked out of the house and arrested and whatever else. I don't know if there's any other consequences I can think of, but what an idiot is the comment I wanted to add to all of that. In a statement to CNN, here we are, Trump Jr.'s lawyer, Alan S. Futterfass, said after the election, Don received numerous messages from supporters and others. And given the date, this message likely originated from someone else and was forwarded. I don't know why the date would indicate that it was originated with someone else and was forwarded. That means nothing to me. But it is possible. Well, anyway, immediately before his text to Meadows describing multiple paths for challenging the election, Trump Jr. texted Meadows the following. So this is immediately before. "This is what we need to do. Please read it and please get it to everyone that needs to see it because I'm not sure we're doing it." Now that message tends to indicate that he might have been passing on the thoughts that followed. Well, that plus he's as dumb as a brick, and there's no way he would have come up with it himself. Although the only possibility that a Trump could have conceived of this is the fact that they say, well, we've lost the election, essentially. We've lost the Electoral College. We lost in too many states. What can we do to get a second term anyway? Because if we don't, then we might go to jail because we're afraid that the Democrats will investigate us and find out all the crimes that we did because we did them. And Democrats might be competent investigators. I don't really know. Things could change, right? You never know. They should have been counting on, the hand-wringing Democrats are never going to be able to, they're not even going to be able to make a criminal referral. They're going to be able to get it together to do that. So what are we worried about? But anyway, at that point they were worried. And there's no way that the complexity involved in the actual plan, such as it is with Congress, would occur to any Trump, except insofar as they say, well, here's how the thing works. They get together on January 6th the Electoral College gets together in each of the states on December 14th and they cast their votes. What if we just refuse to write the votes down? Yeah, we don't do that. We don't control in those states, because the Democratic electors are the ones that control the proceedings that day. Well, what if we do our own then? What if we do our own proceedings and say, we really think we won and we get to control what happens in that proceeding and we send different certificates? Maybe, yeah, I don't know. And then what happens on January 6th? Well, all the certificates go there and they open them up and they total them up. What if we don't total them up? What if we say those aren't real? What if, isn't the vice president involved in this? I don't know whether that would occur to him or whether he ever saw it. Somebody could say, well, what happens, you see, is that the certificates get there and the vice president opens them up and reads them and then hands them to the tellers. Or he opens them up and says it's in regular form and gives them to the tellers and the tellers read it, whatever it is. Oh, what if we have Pence, because he's our guy, right? We just have him say, Trump won Arizona, not Biden. Well, but everybody saw on TV that Trump didn't win Arizona. Well, maybe not. I don't know. We might audit that one and figure out that that's different. But supposing even if we lost the audit, we just tell Pence, say Trump won. What could happen? Well, they'll fight about it. They'll object. Well, but we control multiple paths. Couldn't we win? Would there be a vote? We control the Senate still, right? No, wrong. Although, I guess because they still had the two Georgia runoffs, then yes, I guess they did because those guys weren't there yet. If we control the Senate, can't we just vote it back the other way? Yes, Trump won Arizona. Well, what about the House? I don't know. Well, then it gets to be complicated. Anyway, no Trump was going to be able to come up with the plan, but they certainly could come up with the idea of what if we just say to hell with you and do the opposite. That they could come up with. That I think he could have conceived of by himself. So let's see, where were we here? The November 5th text message outlines a strategy that is nearly identical to what allies of the former president attempted to carry out in the months that followed. Trump Jr. makes specific reference to filing lawsuits and advocating recounts to prevent certain swing states from certifying their results, as well as having a handful of Republican state houses put forward slates of fake, quote, Trump electors. I like that they put it in scare quotes here. If all that failed, according to the Trump Jr. text, GOP lawmakers in Congress could simply vote to reinstall Trump as president on January 6th. And this part I think he's heard before, and he might even have heard it in 2016 when things were too close for comfort at the time, or that they might have faithless electors in some states or whatever. Well, he goes on to say, this is where he says, we have operational control, total leverage. He has no punctuation in this, by the way. Moral high ground, POTUS must start second term now. Make of that what you will. The text from Trump Jr. is revealing on a number of levels. It shows how those closest to the former president were already exchanging ideas for how to overturn the election months before the January 6th insurrection and before all the votes were even counted. It would be another 2 days before major news outlets declared Joe Biden the winner on November 7th. The text also adds to a growing body of evidence of how Trump's inner circle was actively engaged in discussing how to challenge the election results. On March 28th, Judge David Carter, a federal judge in California, said that Trump, along with conservative lawyer John Eastman, launched an, quote, unprecedented, unquote, campaign to overturn a Democratic election, calling it a coup in search of a legal theory. George Terwilliger, an attorney for Meadows, declined to comment for this story. A spokesperson for the House Select Committee also declined to comment. Now, this next section, foreshadowing the Trump campaign strategy. Yes. In the weeks following the 2020 election, Trump and his allies eventually filed more than 60 unsuccessful lawsuits in key states, failing to convince the courts that his claims about a stolen election were justified or to uncover any evidence of widespread voter fraud. They also called for various recounts based on those same unfounded voter fraud claims. A number of states conducted recounts in the months after the election, though none of them revealed any fraud substantial enough to have changed the outcome of the vote in any state. And if they believe that that paragraph encompasses the Arizona joke, that would be a huge mistake. I guess they didn't bother going into it, but yeah, there were some actual recounts that were conducted by elections authorities in states, just regular routine recanvassing of votes to make sure that everything came out okay when it was close. And then there were outrageous jokes like what went on in Arizona and Wisconsin and elsewhere. While Trump Jr. was publicly pushing various voter fraud conspiracy theories and generally casting doubt about the results in states like Pennsylvania and Georgia, his text to Meadows reveals there were other ideas being discussed privately. Specifically, Trump Jr. previews a strategy to supplant authentic electors with fake Republican electors in a handful of states. That plan was eventually orchestrated and carried out by allies of the former president and overseen by his then attorney, Rudy Giuliani. We still need to get to that guy. In his text to Meadows, Trump Jr. identifies two key dates in December that serve as deadlines for states to certify their electoral results and compel Congress to accept them. Though the dates are largely ceremonial, in his text, Trump Jr. appears to point to them as potential weaknesses to be exploited by casting doubt on the legitimacy of the election results. Again, these are formal, but formalities as well. And he just says, suppose we just do the opposite of what's required on those days. Suppose we send the opposite of the kind of people who are supposed to be there. Suppose we pretend the certificates say the opposite of what they say. How will they stop us? You're not supposed to do that, but suppose we do that. In many cases, the law just doesn't contemplate this and doesn't know what to do and puts it up for a vote, and we can win that vote. It may even be, I think, given the messages that Trump Jr. passes on, I think he may know, and he may have known from 2016 when things were close and they weren't sure how the Electoral College was going to come out. I think he might actually have been aware of what happens when there is an electoral tie or no one gets a majority of the electoral votes and they throw it to the House and they vote by state delegations, because that comes up in here. But first, seeking Trump electors. Trump Jr.'s November 5th text to Meadows came as similar notions of faithless electors were starting to percolate publicly on conservative social media. Trump Jr. sent the text to Meadows at 12:51 p.m., just minutes after conservative radio host Mark Levin had tweeted a similar idea and suggested state legislatures have final say on electors, which they really don't. But that's, I'm sure, what he said on his radio show. If secretaries of state were unable to certify the results, Trump Jr. argues in his text to Meadows that they should press their advantage by having Republican-controlled state assemblies step in and put forward separate slates of, quote, Trump electors, he writes. Republicans control Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, North Carolina, etc. We get Trump electors, Trump Jr. adds. Trump Jr.'s text, however, refers to an untested legal theory. Now, it's not even untested. It's actually been tested and defeated, but okay. Refers to the untested legal theory, they say, that state houses are the ultimate authority in elections and can intervene to put forward a different slate of electors than those chosen by the voters, when in reality this is a ceremonial process and the outcome is essentially a foregone conclusion. That's a good statement of it. And I guess if you put it that way, then maybe it is untested legal theory. But the part that they did test was the claim that because the Constitution says that the state legislatures will determine the manner of electing electors, that everything about elections and the way they're run is up to the state legislatures, and any change that's made in the way the elections are conducted is unconstitutional unless it's made by an act of the legislature, and that's just wrong. But that was the theory that they were using to to bestow upon or to convince the state legislators that they had the power to simply yank the rug out from underneath the elected slate of electors and replace them with electors of their choice. That's something they can do in the absence of an election. Before an election takes place and is scheduled, they can say, this year we're doing our electors this way by act of the legislature. But no, they can't hold an election, and then if they decide they don't like the outcome, change the method, change the means by which the state is going to select its electors. It's too late for that. But then again, one day, 5 robes, boom. That's never been what it means, but now it is. All right. But, okay, so we left off there. I thought it was put nicely that in reality, their whole concept of changing the direction of the state's electors and changing how they're selected after the election's been held. No, this is the legislature's participation at that point is a ceremonial process and a foregone conclusion. It's simply ratified for official purposes so that everybody can see that the right authorities have, given their imprimatur to the outcome, and when it arrives in Washington, they say, this is regular in form and authentic. I can tell because all the right signatures are here. The Justice Department and the House Committee are both investigating the fake electors plot within the context of what unfolded on January 6th and Trump's broader effort to overturn the election. The strategy floated by Trump Jr. is similar to what was outlined by former Texas Governor and Trump Energy Secretary Rick Perry. I forgot about that guy, who texted Meadows on November 4th, suggesting 3 state legislatures ignore the will of their voters and deliver the state's electors to Trump instead. And that text, and it's ringing a bell now that I can see it again. Here's an aggressive strategy. He spelled aggressive wrong, apparently. Why can't the states of Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and other R-controlled state houses, declare this is BS, where conflicts and elections are not called that night, and just send their own electors to vote and have it go to the SCOTUS? Perry's text message read. It is very aggressive, and it skips, 10, 15 steps in how these things work. But why can't we? And no one's ever asked before. A spokesman for Perry told CNN at the time that the former energy secretary denies being the author of the text. However, multiple people who know Rick Perry previously confirmed to CNN that the phone number that the committee has associated with that text message is Perry's number. I don't know. I butt dialed the whole Eastman memo. Okay. Now, this next section, we control them all. That's the laughable part. Trump Jr. also texts Meadows that Congress could intervene on January 6th and overturn the will of the voters if, for some reason, they were unable to secure enough electoral votes to tip the outcome in Trump's favor using the state-based strategy. That option, according to Trump Jr.'s text, involves a scenario where neither Biden nor Trump have enough electoral votes to be declared a winner, prompting the House of Representatives to vote by state party delegation, with each state getting 1 vote. Republicans control 28 states, Democrats 22 states. Trump Jr. text, once again, Trump wins. We either have a vote we control and we win, or, that is to say, they either, get fake slates of electors there, or it gets kicked to Congress on January 6th, although he's doing a very Euro thing here. Gets kicked to Congress on 6 January 2021. He texts Meadows so that goes along with operational control. And then he's like military dating it. He's very tactical. In a series of memos in early January, conservative lawyer John Eastman proposed a variation on that idea, as you all know. Eastman's memo laid out a 6-step plan for Vice President Mike Pence to overturn the election for Trump, which included throwing out the results in 7 states because they allegedly had competing electors. In fact, no state had actually put forward an alternate slate of electors. There were merely Trump allies claiming, without any authority, to be electors. Eastman, who has been subpoenaed by the House Select Committee and is fighting to keep some of his records secret from investigators because of how innocent he is, was accused by Carter of likely engaging in a criminal conspiracy with Trump to overturn the election. That's the judge, remember? Carter, not Jimmy Carter, though he probably thinks the same thing. Dr. Eastman has an unblemished record as an attorney and respectfully disagrees with the judge's findings. His attorney, Charles Burnham, said in response to the judge's ruling. Next section, Trump Jr. pushes Meadows to fire Wray, remember him, head of the FBI, and install a loyalist at the FBI. Trump Jr. ends his November 5th text by calling for a litany of personnel moves to solidify his father's control over the government by putting loyalists in key jobs and initiate investigations into the Biden family, which is totally appropriate for a kid who has no role in government and was supposed to have been firewalled off from his dad's government so that he could run the business, which is why Trump didn't need to sell off his business in the first place, but whatever. So here's his plan. Fire Wray, head of the FBI, makes some sense, right? And fire Fauci, because that's so important to law enforcement, right? Fire Fauci, because I'm mad at him about those masks. So fire Wray, fire Fauci, he texts, referring, of course, to FBI Director Christopher Wray and White House coronavirus advisor Anthony Fauci. Trump Jr. then proposes making former acting Director of National Intelligence Rick Grenell interim head of the FBI and having then Attorney General Bill Barr select a special prosecutor on the hard drive from hell Biden crime family. How deep into this conspiracy theory is ridiculous. What a moron. All right. As Trump refused to concede in the days and weeks after the 2020 election, rumors swirled that he was still considering firing Wray, along with several other top officials with whom he had grown frustrated. Trump and his allies sharply criticized Wray for failing to produce information that they claimed would be harmful to the president's political enemies, including Biden. Why didn't you find that evidence? Why not? It's out there. CNN previously reported that the prospect of Trump firing Wray hung over the FBI for weeks, dating to before Election Day, while Wray remains in his post and Barr resigned in mid-December 2020 without naming a special prosecutor to investigate the Bidens. Trump Jr.'s text underscores just how precarious the situation at DOJ was in the immediate aftermath of the election. The same is true for Trump Jr.'s recommendation that Meadows replace Wray with Grenell, someone who not only lacked the usual qualifications to lead the FBI, but also had a proven track record of doing the former president's bidding. After serving a controversial 3-month stint as Trump's acting intel chief, Grenell hit the campaign trail in late 2020 to help promote Trump's unfounded claims of widespread voter fraud and support his legal challenges in a key swing state, Nevada. On November 5th, Biden held a slim lead over Trump in Nevada, but appeared poised to win the state's 6 electoral votes. That same day, Grenell and Trump campaign officials announced they were filing a new lawsuit to, quote, stop the counting of illegal votes, unquote, but provided no evidence to support their claims of rampant fraud. All right, and that is the, again, awkward ending to the article. There's sort of falls flat there at the end. I mean, it's a solid claim against Grenell. It just seems tangential and maybe belonged somewhere else in the article. But anyway, that gives you a reminder, good reminder to keep Rick Grenell's name in mind because he's likely to implicate himself in a number of other aspects of this plot along the way. So pretty amazing. I am, once again astonished. Not that I'm not surprised that Trump Jr. mixed himself up in this and felt like it sounded sort of kind of cool and legalish, and so therefore probably was real. He'd never heard of it before. None of this stuff was familiar to him, but it sounded really cool. And then he added a little tactical language about having operational control about that stuff and made it sound really awesome. But wow, I don't know. I mean, I guess it's one thing that he would believe it. And of course, like they say, on many levels, it's kind of astonishing that son of the president would feel comfortable texting the White House chief of staff, yeah, fire the FBI director, and also fire the coronavirus advisor in the middle of a pandemic, right? Just, these are just little moves that I think you should make for me, and also throw out the Electoral College and overturn the Constitution. Thanks. I'll get back to you later. Well, anyway, I don't know. I had a thought at one point that there might be some defense to the whole thing along, I guess, Alan Futterfuss's lines, because the election had not yet been called by the networks for Biden. I wondered whether he would say, look, I just think that there was fraud going on. I didn't know that Biden had won the election. It was still up in the air. It could easily have been that by November 7th, they ended up calling the election for Trump instead. I just was so concerned about election integrity that I didn't even wait for the results to be announced by the networks. I wanted, to stand for integrity no matter who was eventually called by the networks. And I wonder whether that just might work. But gosh, I hope not, because none of the rest of this stuff should have. It's really astounding. And but yeah, again, the part that really hit me the hardest was his surety of victory. We control all the paths except the 60 paths that they actually tried, and we have operational control over it except for the FBI arresting everybody who tried to affect our plan. But otherwise, we've done quite well. Would any of you like to hear the story of another Trump White House jerk who's done a lot of things wrong and deserves to be in jail? Because there's another story. This one from the New York Times about Jared Kushner, who nobody likes. Before giving billions to Jared Kushner, which sounds bad already, Saudi investment fund had big doubts. But of course, they gave him the money anyway because they're looking to bribe him. That's the implication anyway. Here's the subheader. Before committing $2 billion to Mr. Kushner's fledgling firm, officials at a fund led by the Saudi Crown Prince, Mr. Bonesaw, you know him, questioned taking such a big risk. In other words, he has actual advisors, but to hell with them, there's a corrupt deal to be made. The writers on the piece, David D. Kirkpatrick and Kate Kelly, who produced this rather lengthy bit for us, 6 months after leaving the White House. Remember now, he has left the White House, so okay, right? 6 months after leaving the White House, Jared Kushner secured a $2 billion investment from a fund led by the Saudi Crown Prince, a close ally during the Trump administration, despite objections from the fund's advisors about the merits of the deal. What? I can't believe it. A panel that screens investments for the main Saudi sovereign wealth fund cited concerns about the proposed deal with Mr. Kushner's newly formed private equity firm, Affinity Partners, previously undisclosed documents show. Those objections included the inexperience of the Affinity Fund management. That's Jared. The possibility that the kingdom would be responsible for, quote, the bulk of the investment and risk. That's the interesting thing, too, right? I'm Jared Kushner, and I have a new private equity fund. It's called the Affinity Fund, Affinity Partners. And we're worth $2 billion. We have a $2 billion under investment. Oh, very interesting, Mr. Kushner. And what kind of commitment are you looking for from us here at the Saudi Wealth Fund? I'm actually looking for $2 billion. Well, so you're looking to double the amount of money you have under investment? No. The $2 billion I was talking about having was yours. I was hoping you would give me that. So you have how much under investment now? in the neighborhood of zero. But when this deal is concluded, $2 billion. Huh? How do you like the sound of that? Well, that's much more impressive. Sure. Well, that's the situation here. So what were they saying? Oh, right. The objections included the fact that they would be Affinity Fund Management is inexperienced. They don't know what they're doing. The possibility that the $2 billion we're being asked to invest in the Affinity Fund would represent the bulk of everything they had. And also due diligence on the fledgling firm's operations found them, quote, unsatisfactory in all aspects. That's not the rating you want. Unsatisfactory in all aspects. There's more. These are semicolons, so this means there's more stuff here. A proposed asset management fee that, quote, seems excessive. Boy, these guys are real winners. And public relations risks from Mr. Kushner's prior role as a senior advisor to his father-in-law, former President Donald J. Trump, according to minutes of the panel's meeting last June 30th. So, again, the objections. What are the pros and cons? Let's think about this, guys. On the pro side, there isn't much. Let's start with the con side and come back. Let's, as business people say, we'll circle back to the pros after that. As cons go, these guys have no experience. They have nothing in their fund. The money we give them is basically all that they've got. We've done our due diligence on the guys, and I believe, how did we rate them? We're like less, it's like half a star, I think they got out of the 5. We were concerned when we did our due diligence that they were, how can I say it? Unsatisfactory in all aspects. Okay, that's bad. Number 4, they also, on top of all of this, they want a management fee that seems excessive. Like 75% of earnings. That doesn't make any sense. Like we don't have any earnings record. We don't believe they'll ever establish one. The only money in the fund is ours, and they want to take it all just in fees, whether they make us any money or not. And 5th, he was in Donald Trump's administration, and that guy sucked. And everyone knows it and feels worse about him every minute that passes. But other than that, what about the pros? He's tall and thin. Is that good? Are we interested in that? No. I don't know. He's Jewish. Is that a pro? Saudi Arabia. I don't know. Strong ties to Israel. Also not really good in our book. I mean, we're getting better with those guys. We're trying. But, anything, probably doesn't eat pork. That's right. Check. No pork. So, no bacon, but doesn't know what he's doing, and all the money he'd be playing with would be ours. And what do you think? And Mr. Bonesaw thought, let's do it anyway. That's the upshot of it. Here's more details on it. Days later, the full board, after the panel, the experts there said, nah, this sucks. Don't do it. It's crazy. And it's unsatisfactory in all aspects. But days later, the full board, which I guess means the boss, the full board of the $620 billion public investment fund led by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, Saudi Arabia's de facto ruler and a beneficiary of Mr. Kushner's support when he worked as a White House advisor, overruled the panel. It's a monarchy, so he overruled the panel. Ethics experts, as if that were an interest to the Saudi Arabian monarchy, ethics experts say that such a deal creates the appearance of potential payback for Mr. Kushner's actions in the White House, or of a bid for future favor if Mr. Trump seeks and wins another presidential term in 2024. Look out for that. Mr. Kushner played a leading role inside the Trump administration defending Crown Prince Mohammed after U.S. intelligence agencies concluded that he had approved the 2018 killing and dismemberment of Jamal Khashoggi, a Saudi columnist for the Washington Post, not this paper, sorry, I'm reading the New York Times, and a resident of Virginia, well, now that's really saying something, who had criticized the kingdom's rulers. It occurs to me that I have done that. Gah. The Saudi fund agreed to invest twice as much and on more generous terms, like higher fees, I guess, with Mr. Kushner than it did at about the same time with former Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin, who was also starting a new fund, even though Mr. Mnuchin had a record as a successful investor before entering government, the documents show. And by the way, when he entered government as the Secretary of the Treasury, not coffee boy for dad. But they only gave him $1 billion, the amount of the investment in his firm, Liberty Strategic Capital, poorly named for a monarch, right? $1 billion had not been previously disclosed, but I guess Jared told everybody just to stick it to Mnuchin. A spokesman for Mr. Kushner's firm said of its relationship with the Saudi Public Investment Fund, that's SPIF for short, by the way, if you care to do it. It doesn't really actually say that, but affinity, he does almost. He doesn't call it the Saudi Public Investment Fund. He just talks about a PIF, a Public Investment Fund, later. But that could be said as PIF, and this would be SPIF. Affinity, like many other top investment firms, of which we are not one, is proud to have PIF and other leading organizations that have careful screening criteria as investors. Does you imagine that? It's a selling thing. I mean, he's telling people, you should trust us with your money because the Saudi Public Investment Fund trusts us with their money. And they have a very careful screening process. As a matter of fact, they concluded that we were unsatisfactory in all aspects. How do you like that? I bet you thought you knew what unsatisfactory means. Well, you were wrong. You're pretty wrong about that. You don't understand how the law works, nor do you understand how words like unsatisfactory or all respects work. A spokesman, I guess they weren't counting on that getting out. A spokesman for the Saudi fund declined to comment on its investment process. If any additional discussions about the deal took place, they were not reflected in the documents and correspondence obtained by the New York Times. What more would you need? The Times reported last fall that Mr. Kushner had been seeking a Saudi investment. Now the internal fund records and correspondence obtained by the Times show the outcome, the scale and timing of his firm's deal, as well as the debate it aroused. Those documents and other filings indicate that at this point, Mr. Kushner's venture depends primarily on the Saudi money. At least he's not beholden, right? You see how this works now. He owes them nothing. Just a little foreign emolument. Mr. Kushner planned to raise up to $7 billion in all, according to a document prepared last summer for the Saudi Fund's board. But so far, he appears to have signed up few other major investors. Maybe the plan was to say, well, the Saudis trusted me with $2 billion, so you can trust me too. Except now we know they didn't trust him. They were just doing it anyway. In its most recent public filings with the Securities and Exchange Commission, dated March 31st, Mr. Kushner's firm reported that its main fund had $2.5 billion under management, almost entirely from investors based overseas. Most of that appears to be the $2 billion from Saudi Arabia. Yes, $2 billion is most of $2.5 billion. But on the other hand, $500 million, I mean, I'd take it, right? It's nothing to sneeze at, $500 million, but 4/5 of the funds being managed were Saudi funds. They were basically an offshoot sovereign wealth fund or public investment fund, as they like to call it, or whatever the hell it is. And it does say it all almost entirely comes from overseas investors. So $500 million or thereabouts comes from some other overseas investor. It's all other people's money. The Saudi documents obtained by the Times say that in return for its investment, the Saudi fund would receive a stake of at least 28% in Mr. Kushner's main investment vehicle. No law or rules constrain the investment activities of former administration officials after leaving the White House. Many from both parties have profited from connections and experiences gained in government. But Robert Weissman, president of the nonprofit group Public Citizen, called Mr. Kushner's relationship with the Saudis, quote, extremely troubling, arguing that his stance toward the kingdom's leadership as a senior advisor makes the business partnership appear even more to be both a reward to and an investment in Kushner. Well, it is. Saudi officials say that the kingdom's public investment fund, which also holds stakes in the ride-sharing company Uber and the Newcastle United Football Club in Britain, operates autonomously. By the way, they should just get rid of all these football clubs in Britain. One's owned by the Russian oligarch, one's owned, at least in part, by the Saudi Public Investment Fund. And dirty business, I guess, and I don't know. So what's that, like 1.5 clubs? Screw them all. Paint them all with the same brush. They're just soccer players. Who cares? But anyway, right. What was it? Oh, yes. It owns stakes in those two things. It operates, they say, autonomously with an elaborate governance structure that includes the investment panel. But Prince Mohammed took control of the fund when he rose to power in 2015, and he is its paramount decision maker. And as you see before, yes, they have a elaborate governance structure, which the absolute monarch of Saudi Arabia, or the crown prince anyway, can sweep aside and say, to hell with all of that. So elaborate though it may be, it's not of any value if he doesn't want it to be. Mr. Kushner, whose fund has not publicly disclosed a theme or focus, it's unsatisfactory in all respects, has little experience or track record in private equity. Before working in the White House, he ran his family's commercial real estate empire, sometimes with disappointing results. His best-known deal was the $1.8 billion purchase of the office tower at 666 Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, which was probably ill-fated from the start, but whatever. Oh, and interestingly, he paid about the amount that he just got from Saudi Arabia for it. In 2007, that's when that thing happened. The building's mortgage became a crippling liability when the recession hit the next year. Diplomats, investors, and ethics experts noted during the Trump administration that his anticipated return to the family business injected a potential conflict of interest into Mr. Kushner's relationship with Prince Mohammed and other oil-wealthy Arab royals. Many are major long-term investors in American real estate, and the Kushner family had courted them before. While advising Mr. Trump, Mr. Kushner developed a friendship and an informal alliance with the Saudi crown prince. Prince Mohammed signaled that he favored closer relations between Israel and the Arab monarchs of the Persian Gulf, which was also one of Mr. Kushner's priorities while in the Trump administration. Well, now hold on a second. His priority was Middle East peace, and it became a priority, I guess we could say, that there be closer relations between Israel and the Arab monarchs of the Persian Gulf, with whom there was no real conflict to speak of with Israel. I mean, they were opposed to Israeli anything, including probably the right to exist, formally as part of their solidarity with the Palestinian cause, but there was almost no real serious direct interaction, let alone warfare, between those monarchies and Israel. And concluding the peace between them, that was never anybody's priority when they talked about Middle East peace and solving the Middle East peace problem. That was about the Palestinians and the Israelis. And it's really about it at this point. It was down to them, and that got nowhere. But I did negotiate peace between Israel and people with whom they weren't really at war. Ta-da! That became the priority. I guess I would make that a priority too. I failed at the other priority. Let's make this the priority instead. It appears to have worked. He helped negotiate a series of agreements called the Abraham Accords, opening diplomatic relations between Israel and other Arab monarchies. After leaving government, he set up a nonprofit to promote economic and other ties between the countries. You guys do the nonprofit thing. You go over there. I'm doing the $2 billion one. In Washington, Mr. Kushner had also helped broker $110 billion in weapons sales to Saudi Arabia over 10 years. He helped protect those and other weapons deals from congressional outrage over the murder of Mr. Khashoggi and the humanitarian catastrophe created by the Saudi-led military intervention in Yemen. The debate within the Saudi fund over investing with Mr. Kushner was a stark contrast to the easy approval of the proposal by Mr. Mnuchin, a former Goldman Sachs partner who invested in numerous Hollywood films, including The Lego Movie. That's what they chose, and helped resurrect a failing California bank before entering government. Mr. Mnuchin's fund is focused on cybersecurity, financial technology, and entertainment, all sectors that fit Saudi priorities, according to an executive summary prepared by the fund's staff. The summary noted that Mr. Mnuchin's work at the Treasury gave him, quote, significant access toward understanding the future of the U.S. financial system, and the firm's founders had, quote, deep experience at some of the highest levels of the U.S. regulatory system, unquote, overseeing and monitoring its industries. So that's quite a contrast, you see, from no experience to speak of and unsatisfactory in all aspects. But why not $1 billion for the good one and $2 billion for the crappy one? That's what they did. As Treasury Secretary, Mr. Mnuchin had also chaired a committee responsible for vetting certain merger deals with foreign companies. The summary said that he had shaped the new fund to accommodate investment from foreign governments like the kingdom. In its most recent filing, dated March 31st, Mr. Mnuchin's firm reported raising $2.7 billion from a total of 33 investors. Most of the money came from abroad, and the Saudi documents say that other Persian Gulf states also invested. But he raised A, more than Jared, and B, raised it from 33 investors. I don't know. And only $1 billion from the Saudis. A spokesman for Liberty Strategic Capital said the firm has a diverse investor base, including U.S. insurance companies, family offices, sovereign wealth funds, and other institutional investors. Both Mr. Kushner's and Mr. Mnuchin's funds treated the Saudi fund as a cornerstone investor, the public investment fund documents say, offering the Saudis a discount on the standard 2% asset management fee for private equity firms, as well as a cut of the firm's 20% share of any fund profits, known as carried interest. But the Saudis agreed to pay Mr. Mnuchin's firm only a 1% asset management fee, compared to 1.25% for Mr. Kushner's, the documents indicate, on a $2 billion investment that would pay his firm $25 million a year, not including a share of any profits earned by the affinity fund. Win or lose, they take $25 million in management fees. Both firms agreed to open regional offices in Riyadh, which the Saudi government says it will soon require of any international company doing business with the kingdom. That's pretty savvy. The 5-member board investment committee evaluating Mr. Kushner's proposal referred to it with the code name Project Astro, which, as I'm reading it, I'm like, they referred to it with the very sly code name Project A-hole. Like, come on. So Project Astro. All right, I'm not even certain what that's supposed to mean. Astro, does that mean anything? I can't put my finger on it. But okay. The panel was led by Yasir Al-Rumayyan, a Harvard Business School graduate, congratulations, who was also chairman of Saudi Aramco, the state-owned oil giant. Do they have a lot of oil there? The panel also included Andrew Liveris, Liveris, Andrew Liveris, the Australian-born former chief executive of the Dow Chemical Company, and Ayman Al-Sayari, the vice chairman of the Saudi Central Bank. A panel member identified in the minutes as Dr. Al-Mojel, possibly Ibrahim Al-Mojel, the chairman of the Saudi Industrial Development Fund, who holds a PhD from Stanford, asked before the June 30th, 2021 meeting about the justification for investing in Mr. Kushner's fund. Why is the strategic benefit worth the risk? He he asked, according to printed responses. The responses, apparently prepared by staff of the Saudi fund, argued that the promised Riyadh office of Mr. Kushner's firm, Affinity, would help the Saudis, quote, capitalize on the capabilities of Affinity's founders' deep understanding of different government policies and geopolitical systems. What? I mean, yeah, that seems like a nonsense answer. The best you can make out of it is we're saying if they have an office here, then we can go to them and ask them questions about different governmental policies. Like, what's the difference between the United States and the Saudi Arabian government? Oh, well, one's got a king. Yeah, really. I mean, that's just if you have Kushner there. Now, he's not going to be there. So you're talking about whatever local secretaries they hire to keep the office running. What a sweet job that's got to be too, right? If they're never there, you just come in and you get a nice office suite and you go in there and you just do nothing. And I guess every once in a while when Jared Kushner shows up, you got to arrange for a hotel room for him or something. But otherwise, just have the office cleaned and bring in fresh flowers and, I don't know, foosball and drinks. I don't know. Anyway, but some answer too, right? Okay, well, if he opens an office here, we'll be able to ask him questions and they'll share their deep understanding of different governmental policies and geopolitical systems. Because, we don't have that. Sure they do. They all went to Harvard. The explanation for the absence of any American institutional investors in Mr. Kushner's fund was that he, quote, would like to avoid media attention. The written responses said, oops, oh well. Accordingly, Affinity has approached international investors on a very discreet basis. Give me all your money. Mr. Kushner's lack of private equity experience and the unsatisfactory results of due diligence reviews conducted on behalf of the Saudi fund are valid and important concerns, the responses acknowledged, but they attributed the findings to the fact that he was still setting up the infrastructure for his company. What's more, the responses added, the Saudi fund had, quote, partially mitigated these risks. The Saudis had stipulated that Mr. Kushner's firm could draw down only $500 million of the $2 billion commitment before having a qualified investment team in place, onboarding core operational professionals, and constructing the investment committee. That's a good protection, I guess. All he can do is steal $500 million. So perfect. Late last year, Mr. Kushner hired two experienced private equity investors, Brett Perlman and Assad Naqvi. The recent securities filing states that Affinity Partners now has a staff of 20, about half of whom are investment professionals. Even after reading the responses, Mr. Liveris, the former Dow Chemical chief executive, and Mr. Al-Sayari, of the Saudi Central Bank, added their own doubts along with Dr. Al-Mojels. Mr. Al-Rumayyan, the panel chairman and top executive of the Saudi fund, appeared to concur, according to the minutes. The panel members did not respond to requests for comment or could not be reached. The minutes record that all four panel members attending the meeting stated that they are not in favor of Project Astro. The panel's rules require the votes of a majority of those present to pass a resolution, the minutes note. Mr. Al-Rumayyan, in this case, suggested raising the panel's views and decision to the fund's board, led by the Crown Prince. But within days, the board had passed a resolution approving the deal. Documents show. I will chop your heads off unless you do it. Alrighty then. In a letter dated July 5th, fund staff explained to a board member who had questioned the size of the investment why it could not be cut back. This investment aims to form a strategic relationship with the Affinity Partners Fund and its founder, Jared Kushner, the letter said. A reduction in the size of the $2 billion stake may negatively or fundamentally affect the framework of the agreed strategic and commercial relationship. That's it. That's the whole story. We made it to the end, but that's basically it. Why did you give them $2 billion instead of like we did with Mnuchin? Why not $1 billion? Well, you see, if we do that, Jared Kushner will find out that we don't trust him and don't think he's smart enough to do any good with this money. And then he'll be mad at us, and then he won't help us do things later if his father-in-law wins the presidency again, or he just finds another way to steal from the government.
Oh.
Well, if you put it that way, then we should end the story. And so they did.
From networksradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Well, that's what we've got for you today. That's what we can cram into an hour, or just a little bit over an hour. So we got a bonus couple of minutes here. We'll be back tomorrow with another hour show, just to keep you company for one more day. See what happens on Wednesday. Roll the dice, and then see you live once again on Thursday.